King Herod Agrippa I was a man of great political power and influence. Could his rise to prominence have been anything other than divine favor? The grandson of Herod the Great, he ruled over Judea with the authority granted by Rome. His reign was marked by a delicate balance between pleasing the Roman Empire and maintaining order among the Jewish people. Could a man of such political skill be tempted to believe in his own invincibility? Herod knew how to manipulate alliances, gaining favor with both Caesar and the people. But could the thirst for power have begun to cloud his judgment? With each political victory, Herod's confidence grew. Could he have started to believe that his success was a result of his own brilliance rather than God's providence? The people revered him for his leadership, and Rome trusted him to maintain stability in Judea. Could such adoration have gone to his head? The king who once acknowledged God's authority over the land was now slowly drifting into dangerous waters. Could a man surrounded by flattery and praise resist the temptation to believe he was more than mortal? Herod's relationship with the Jewish leaders had always been strained, but he managed to maintain peace. Could his ability to appease both Rome and the Jewish people have fed his ego? As his power increased, so did his ambition. Could anyone have foreseen the pride that was beginning to consume him? The people's admiration for Herod grew as he delivered speeches and made decisions that favored their interests. Could a man be surrounded by constant praise and not believe he was greater than the ordinary man? But with power came temptation. Could Herod resist the allure of being seen as more than a king? He knew that in the ancient world, kings often claimed divine status, and he began to entertain the dangerous idea that he, too, could be seen as a god. Could anyone have warned him that accepting such worship would lead to his downfall? Herod's pride began to grow, and with it his distance from the true God of Israel. Could a king of such stature be humbled, or was his fate sealed by his own arrogance? The tension was palpable. Could Herod continue to reign without acknowledging the true source of his power? His political success had brought him to the height of his career, but with every step up the ladder of success, he was stepping further away from the humility required of a leader. Could a man who had achieved so much in the eyes of the world remember that his authority ultimately came from God? Herod was on the verge of a dangerous decision, one that would challenge his mortality and bring about his fall. Could he see the precipice he was standing on? Herod's heart was growing harder. Could anyone around him see the change that was taking place? The once cunning and politically savvy leader was beginning to believe in his own greatness. Could he resist the voices around him that encouraged this self-worship? The king who had once recognized the limits of his own power now flirted with the idea of godhood. Could he realize the danger before it was too late, or was his pride already leading him toward destruction? As Herod's reign continued, the adoration of the people increased. Could they see the growing pride in their king, or were they blinded by his power and wealth? The crowds that once praised him for his political skill now began to see him as something more. Could Herod himself be blind to the trap he was walking into? The man who ruled over Judea with wisdom and strength was now on a path of self-destruction, one paved by the flattery and praise of those who sought his favor. Could he turn back before it was too late? Herod's power had reached its peak, but with that power came a dangerous temptation. The temptation to claim the glory that belonged to God alone. Could anyone in his court have warned him of the dangers of such pride, or were they all too enamored with their king to see the truth? Herod stood on the brink of a decision that would forever change his fate. Could a king who had risen so high be brought down by the very pride that had helped him ascend? The event, Herod receives worship. The day arrived when Herod would make his fatal mistake. Could a single moment of pride seal a man's fate for eternity? Herod had arranged a grand assembly in Caesarea to address the people of Tyre and Sidon, cities that relied on his favor for trade and resources. As he stepped out before the crowd, adorned in a robe that shimmered in the sunlight, the people gazed upon him with awe. Could Herod feel the intoxicating power of their admiration? He delivered his speech with the confidence of a man who believed himself invincible. But could he sense the danger lurking beneath the surface of their praise? The crowd erupted in applause. Could their voices have been louder than the voice of reason in Herod's mind? "This is the voice of a god, not of a man," they shouted. Acts 12:22. The words echoed through the amphitheater, and for a moment, Herod hesitated. Could this be the moment of decision? Would he reject the blasphemous praise, or allow himself to be lifted up as divine? The people's cheers grew louder, and Herod, intoxicated by their adulation, stood silent. Could he truly believe he was worthy of being called a god? In that moment, Herod made his choice. Could a man who accepts worship that belongs only to God expect anything but judgment? He did not rebuke the people, nor did he give glory to God. Instead, he accepted their worship, basking in the glory that should have been directed to Yahweh alone. Could Herod comprehend the magnitude of the sin he had just committed? By allowing the people to worship him as a god, he had crossed a line that no man should ever cross. Could anyone escape the consequences of such blasphemy? Herod's heart swelled with pride. Could he have believed that his power had reached the level of divinity? The crowd's praise echoed in his ears, and for a moment, he may have truly believed that he was more than just a man. Could a mortal man, no matter how powerful, ever rival the true God of Israel? The line between reality and delusion had blurred for Herod, and in that moment, he allowed himself to believe the lie. Could he still turn back, or was it too late? The scene was one of triumph. For Herod, it seemed like the pinnacle of his reign. Could this be the moment he had longed for? The moment when he would be seen not just as a king, but as a god? The people's praise was unrelenting, and Herod basked in their worship. Could he realize that this moment of glory was, in fact, the beginning of his downfall? The king who had once ruled with wisdom had now allowed pride to consume him completely. Could he see the judgment that was about to fall upon him? As Herod stood before the people, accepting their praise, he sealed his fate. Could anyone have warned him that such pride would lead to his destruction? The king who had once acknowledged God's authority had now rejected it entirely, choosing instead to place himself on the throne of divinity. Could a man who claimed the glory of God survive the consequences of such arrogance? The crowd continued to cheer, unaware that they were witnessing the beginning of the end for their king. Could Herod escape the judgment that was now inevitable? Herod's silence in the face of the crowd's worship was deafening. Could he not feel the weight of the blasphemy he was committing? By accepting the people's adoration as though he were a god, Herod had committed the ultimate act of pride. Could a man who sought to elevate himself to the status of divinity be spared from the wrath of the true God? The king stood proud, but the judgment of God was already upon him. Could he sense the danger he had just invited into his life? The crowd's worship continued, and Herod stood tall, his heart filled with pride. Could he have known that this moment of triumph would be his last? The people who praised him as a god would soon witness the devastating consequences of his arrogance. Could Herod still turn back, or had his fate already been sealed by his refusal to give glory to God? The king who had once ruled over Judea with power and authority was now standing on the precipice of destruction, and there was no one who could save him. Could the judgment of God be far behind? 3. The judgment of God struck down by an angel. As Herod stood before the people, basking in their worship, something unseen stirred in the heavens. Could Herod have felt the shift in the atmosphere as divine judgment approached? Suddenly, without warning, he was struck by an angel of the Lord. Acts 12:23. Could Herod have expected that the God he had just defied would respond so swiftly? The blow was invisible, but devastating. Could anyone in the crowd have sensed that they were witnessing divine justice in action? Herod's fate was sealed, and the pain began to take hold. Could Herod have foreseen the consequences of claiming glory that belonged only to God? The pain was immediate and unbearable. Could Herod in that moment have realized his fatal mistake? As the angel's blow took effect, Herod's body began to fail him. Could this be the consequence of pride and arrogance that the prophets had warned about for generations? Herod had exalted himself above the true God, and now he was paying the price. Could anyone in the crowd have imagined that the king, once so powerful, would be brought low so quickly? The judgment was swift, and there was no escaping it. Could Herod still plead for mercy, or was it too late? Herod's once proud stance faltered as the affliction began to ravage his body. Could he feel the weight of divine wrath bearing down on him? The man who had stood before the crowd in glory was now crumbling under the force of God's judgment. Could Herod's pride have blinded him to the reality that no man, no matter how powerful, could rival the God of Israel? The angel's strike was more than physical. It was a spiritual condemnation. Could Herod's soul be prepared for what awaited him? The crowd that had just worshipped Herod as a god now watched in horror. Could they have known that they were witnessing divine retribution? The man they had praised was now being consumed by something unseen, something beyond their understanding. Could the people realize that the God of Israel had just intervened in their midst? Herod's body writhed in pain, and the spectacle of his suffering became a testimony to the power of God. Could anyone still doubt that the true God would not tolerate such blasphemy? Herod's agony was not just physical, it was spiritual. Could he, in his final moments, have realized the gravity of his sin? The king who had accepted worship as a god was now facing the true God, and there was no escape. Could Herod have repented, or was his heart too hardened by pride to seek forgiveness? The divine judgment was upon him, and with every passing moment, Herod's life slipped further away. Could anyone save him from the wrath of the Almighty? The pain intensified, and Herod's body began to deteriorate. Could this be the ultimate price of pride, the destruction of both body and soul? The king who had ruled over Judea with power and authority was now at the mercy of the God he had defied. Could Herod have ever imagined that his life would end in such a way? The worms that consumed him were not just a physical affliction, they were a symbol of the rot that had taken hold of his soul. Could Herod's fate serve as a warning to others who sought to elevate themselves above God? Herod's mind was clouded with pain, but the reality of his situation was clear. Could he have realized, in those final moments, that no man could stand in the place of God? The judgment that had come upon him was swift and just, and there was no escape. Could Herod's pride have led him to believe that he was immune to the consequences of his actions? The worms that ate away at his body were a physical manifestation of the spiritual corruption that had taken hold of his life. Could Herod's suffering be a glimpse of the eternal judgment that awaited him? As Herod's body was consumed, his fate was sealed. Could anyone watching still doubt the power of the God of Israel? The king who had once been praised as a god was now reduced to nothing, his life taken by the very God he had defied. Could this be the ultimate lesson of Herod's life, that no man, no matter how powerful, can claim the glory that belongs to God? Herod's death was a testimony to the justice of God, and his fall would be remembered for generations. Could anyone dare to repeat his mistake? 4. Herod's agony, the slow descent into death. As Herod's body was ravaged by the affliction, he experienced a slow, agonizing descent into death. Could he have imagined that his end would be so painful, so humiliating? His once proud frame, clothed in royal robes, now lay writhing in agony, consumed by worms. Could there be a more fitting punishment for a man who had claimed the glory of God for himself? The worms that devoured his body were a physical manifestation of the decay that had already taken hold of his soul. Could Herod comprehend that this suffering was divine retribution for his pride? The pain was unbearable, and Herod's cries echoed through the palace. Could the man who had stood so tall before the people now realize the frailty of his own power? The once mighty king, who had basked in the adoration of the crowds, was now reduced to a pitiful figure, helpless and dying. Could Herod's suffering be a reminder to all who sought to elevate themselves above their station? The worms that consumed him were a grim symbol of the corruption that had festered within his heart. Could anyone watching fail to see the hand of God in this judgment? As Herod's body deteriorated, the stench of death began to fill the palace. Could the king, who had once been praised as a god, now understand the true power of the God he had defied? The worms that ate away at his flesh were relentless, a slow and painful reminder that no man could claim the glory of God and escape unscathed. Could this be the ultimate lesson of Herod's life, that no earthly power could compare to the power of the Almighty? The king's suffering was a stark contrast to the glory he had once sought, and his descent into death was a powerful reminder of the consequences of pride. Herod's mind, clouded by pain, may have finally grasped the gravity of his sin. Could he, in his final moments, have realized that his acceptance of worship as a god had sealed his fate? The man who had once ruled with power and authority was now powerless in the face of divine judgment. Could Herod's suffering serve as a warning to those who sought to elevate themselves above their rightful place? The worms that consumed his body were not just a physical affliction. They were a symbol of the spiritual decay that had taken root in his heart. Could Herod's agony have opened his eyes to the truth? The once great king was now reduced to a shell of his former self. Could anyone watching his slow, agonizing death fail to see the justice in his suffering? The man who had allowed himself to be worshipped as a god was now being consumed from within, his body a testament to the dangers of pride and arrogance. Could Herod's death be a reminder that no man, no matter how powerful, could rival the true God of Israel? The worms that devoured him were relentless, and Herod's life was slowly slipping away. Could this be the end he had foreseen for himself? As Herod's suffering continued, the palace fell silent. Could anyone around him have seen this coming? The man who had once been praised as a god now lay dying, his body consumed by the very corruption that had taken hold of his soul. Could Herod's death serve as a reminder to all who sought to elevate themselves above God? The worms that ate away at his flesh were a powerful symbol of the judgment that had come upon him. Could anyone doubt that this was the hand of God at work? Herod's life was slipping away, and there was no escaping the judgment that had come upon him. Could he, in his final moments, have repented for his pride and arrogance? The man who had accepted worship as a god was now facing the consequences of his actions, and there was no escape. Could Herod's suffering be a glimpse of the eternal judgment that awaited him? The worms that consumed his body were a reminder that no man could claim the glory of God and live to tell the tale. Could Herod's death serve as a warning to all who sought to follow in his footsteps? As Herod's life came to an end, the palace was left in silence. Could the people who had once praised him as a god now understand the true power of the God of Israel? The king who had accepted worship as divine was now nothing more than a decaying body consumed by worms. Could Herod's death serve as a lasting reminder of the consequences of pride and arrogance? The once mighty king was now gone, but his story would live on as a powerful testimony to the dangers of elevating oneself above God. Could anyone dare to repeat his mistake? 5. The final moments, Herod's last breath. As Herod's life ebbed away, the once powerful king faced the reality of his mortality. Could a man who had been worshipped as a god now confront the fact that he was merely human? The worms that consumed his body were relentless, eating away at the flesh of the king who had once believed himself invincible. Could Herod, in his final moments, have realized that all the power and glory he had sought were fleeting? The king who had once been praised by crowds was now dying alone, his body a testament to the consequences of his pride. Herod's breathing grew shallow, and the pain that had once racked his body began to fade as death approached. Could the man who had ruled over Judea with such authority have foreseen that his life would end in such humiliation? The worms that consumed his flesh were a grim reminder that no man, no matter how powerful, could escape the judgment of God. Could Herod have repented in these final moments, or was his heart too hardened by pride to seek forgiveness? The king's last breath was near, and with it, the end of his reign. The palace that had once echoed with the sounds of Herod's power now fell silent as he took his final breath. Could the people who had once worshipped him as a god now understand the true frailty of human life? Herod's death was a stark reminder that no man, no matter how powerful, could claim the glory of God and survive. Could his final moments have been filled with regret as he realized the mistake he had made in accepting the worship of men? The king's life was over, but his legacy would live on as a warning to all who sought to elevate themselves above their rightful place. As Herod's last breath escaped him, the palace fell into darkness. Could anyone who had witnessed his rise to power have predicted such a tragic end? The man who had once been hailed as a god was now nothing more than a lifeless body, consumed by worms. Could Herod's death serve as a lasting reminder that no man could claim the glory that belonged to God alone? The king, who had once stood before the people in triumph, was now a symbol of the dangers of pride and arrogance. Could anyone watching have failed to see the hand of God in this moment? The crowd that had once cheered for Herod as a god now dispersed, leaving behind the memory of his death. Could they have realized that they, too, were complicit in his downfall by elevating him to the status of a deity? Herod's final moments were a testimony to the power of God's justice, and his death would serve as a reminder to all who sought to claim divine glory for themselves. Could anyone who had witnessed his suffering forget the lesson of Herod's life and death? Herod's last breath marked the end of his reign, but the consequences of his pride would echo through history. Could his death serve as a warning to future generations, reminding them that no man, no matter how powerful, could rival the true God of Israel? The worms that had consumed his body were a grim reminder of the consequences of pride, and Herod's death would be remembered as a testimony to the justice of God. Could anyone who had witnessed his fall dare to repeat his mistake? As Herod's body lay lifeless, the palace that had once been filled with power and grandeur was now a place of silence and death. Could the people who had once worshipped him as a god now understand the true power of the God of Israel? Herod's life had been marked by political success and power, but his death was a reminder that no man could claim the glory of God and escape judgment. Could Herod's final moments serve as a lasting warning to all who sought to elevate themselves above their rightful place? Herod's reign had come to an end, and with it, the lesson of his life was clear. Could any man who sought to claim the glory of God survive the consequences? The worms that had consumed him were a powerful symbol of the judgment that had fallen upon him, and his death would serve as a testimony to the dangers of pride and arrogance. Could Herod's life and death be a reminder to all who sought to exalt themselves above God? The king's final breath had been taken, but his story would live on as a powerful warning to all who followed in his footsteps. 6. The aftermath, the people's realization. In the days following Herod's death, the people of Judea began to realize the significance of what they had witnessed. Could they have seen the hand of God in the events that had unfolded before them? The king they had once worshipped as a god was now gone, and the memory of his death served as a powerful reminder of the dangers of pride. Could the people understand that they had played a role in Herod's downfall by elevating him to the status of a deity? The lesson of Herod's death was clear. No man could claim the glory of God and survive. Word of Herod's death spread quickly throughout the land. Could the people of Tyre and Sidon, who had praised him as a god, now realize the consequences of their blasphemous worship? The once great king who had stood before them in all his glory was now a lifeless body, consumed by worms. Could anyone who had witnessed his fall doubt that this was the judgment of God? The people who had cheered for Herod as a god were now left to reflect on the events that had led to his downfall. Could they have learned the lesson of Herod's pride? Herod's death became a topic of conversation throughout Judea. Could anyone who had once admired him now see the truth, that his power had always been fleeting? The king, who had allowed himself to be worshipped as a god, was now a symbol of the consequences of pride and arrogance. Could the people of Judea now understand that the true God of Israel would not tolerate such blasphemy? Herod's death served as a powerful testimony to the justice of God, and the people who had once praised him were now left to face the reality of his demise. The realization of Herod's fate began to sink in. Could the people who had once celebrated his reign now understand the true cost of elevating a man to the status of a god? The worms that had consumed Herod's body were a physical manifestation of the spiritual corruption that had taken root in his heart. Could the people of Judea see that their own worship of Herod had contributed to his downfall? The lesson of Herod's death was not just for the king, it was for all who had witnessed his rise and fall. Could they too be at risk of falling into the same trap of pride? As the story of Herod's death spread, it became a warning to all who sought to exalt themselves above their rightful place. Could future leaders learn from Herod's mistake and avoid the same fate? The king, who had once been praised as a god, was now a symbol of the dangers of pride and arrogance. Could Herod's death serve as a lasting reminder that no man could claim the glory of God and survive? The people of Judea, who had once worshipped him, were now left to reflect on the consequences of their actions. Could they have seen the truth too late? Herod's death marked a turning point for the people of Judea. Could they now realize that their true allegiance should have always been to the God of Israel? The king, who had allowed himself to be worshipped as a god, was now gone, and the people were left to face the reality of their blasphemy. Could Herod's fate serve as a warning to all who sought to elevate themselves above their rightful place? The story of his fall was a powerful testimony to the justice of God, and the people of Judea would not soon forget the lesson they had learned. Could they avoid making the same mistake in the future? As the people of Judea reflected on Herod's death, they began to understand the true nature of God's power. Could they now see that no man, no matter how powerful, could claim the glory of God? The king who had once been hailed as a god was now nothing more than a decaying body consumed by worms. Could Herod's fate serve as a lasting reminder that the true God of Israel would not tolerate such pride and arrogance? The people who had once praised him were now left to face the consequences of their actions. Could they have learned the lesson of Herod's pride too late? Herod's death became a story told throughout the generations. Could future leaders learn from his mistake and avoid the same fate? The king who had once been hailed as a god was now a symbol of the dangers of pride and arrogance. Could Herod's death serve as a lasting reminder that no man could claim the glory of God and survive? The people of Judea, who had once worshipped him, were now left to reflect on the consequences of their actions. Could they too be at risk of falling into the same trap of pride? 7. The power of God, divine sovereignty affirmed. Herod's death was more than just the end of a king's life. It was a powerful display of God's sovereignty. Could anyone who witnessed this event still doubt the absolute authority of the God of Israel? No matter how powerful Herod had been in life, his death proved that even kings are subject to the will of God. Could any man, no matter how great, stand against the creator of the universe? Herod's fall was a reminder to all that God alone holds the power over life and death. The worms that consumed Herod's body were a symbol of the spiritual decay that had taken root in his heart. Could anyone watching fail to see the message that God was sending through Herod's death? Pride and arrogance had led Herod to accept worship that belonged to God alone, and his punishment was swift and severe. Could any future leader think they could claim the glory of God without facing similar judgment? Herod's demise served as a warning to all who would attempt to exalt themselves above their rightful place. For the people of Judea, Herod's death was a wake-up call. Could they now see the true power of God, who had brought their once great king to his knees? Herod had allowed himself to be worshipped as a god, but in the end, it was the one true God who had the final say. Could this be a reminder to all nations that no human ruler is above divine authority? The God of Israel had demonstrated his justice, and the people were left to reflect on the consequences of challenging his sovereignty. Herod's death reaffirmed a timeless truth. Could any man claim divine status and escape judgment? The scriptures were clear. God would not share his glory with another. Herod's punishment was a fulfillment of this divine principle. Could anyone who witnessed his suffering still believe in their own invincibility? Herod's fate was a powerful reminder that those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Could this be a lesson for all future generations? Herod's fall from power was swift and final, but the message it sent would endure. Could future rulers learn from Herod's mistake and recognize the limits of their power? Herod had been a mighty king, but his pride had led to his downfall. Could anyone watching his decline fail to see the justice of God at work? The worms that consumed him were a physical manifestation of the spiritual corruption that had taken hold of his heart. Could any leader who valued their soul dare to follow in Herod's footsteps? In the days that followed Herod's death, the people of Judea began to reflect on the events they had witnessed. Could they now see that their king had been brought low by the very God he had defied? The once proud ruler, who had accepted worship as a god, was now nothing more than a memory, his body decayed and consumed. Could Herod's death serve as a reminder to all who sought power that true authority comes from God alone? The people of Judea had learned a hard lesson, and the consequences of their king's pride were clear for all to see. The sovereignty of God had been affirmed in the most dramatic way possible. Could anyone still question his power after witnessing the fall of Herod? The king who had once stood before the people in all his glory was now gone, but the message of his death would live on. Could Herod's fate serve as a lasting reminder to all who sought to elevate themselves above their rightful place? The story of his rise and fall would be told for generations, and the lesson was clear. No one can claim the glory of God and survive. Herod's death was not just a personal tragedy, it was a divine statement. Could the people of Judea now see that their true allegiance should have always been to the God of Israel? Herod's pride had led him to believe that he was above the laws of God, but in the end he was humbled in the most profound way. Could any future ruler dare to challenge the God of Israel after witnessing the consequences of Herod's actions? The message was clear. God alone is sovereign, and those who challenge his authority will face the consequences. 8. Conclusion. The warning of Herod's death. Herod's death stands as a warning to all who would place their pride above their allegiance to God. Could anyone who hears this story fail to grasp the consequences of pride and arrogance? The king who had once been praised as a god was now nothing more than a decaying memory, consumed by the worms that symbolized his moral and spiritual decay. Could future generations learn from Herod's mistake and avoid the same fate? His story serves as a powerful reminder that no one is above divine judgment. The lesson of Herod's life and death is clear. No man can claim the glory of God and survive. Herod's pride had led him to accept worship that belonged to God alone, and his punishment was swift and severe. Could any future ruler fail to heed the warning that Herod's fate represents? His downfall serves as a cautionary tale, one that reminds us of the dangers of pride and the importance of humility before God. Could anyone who seeks power and authority learn from Herod's tragic end? Herod's death was a reminder that God's justice is real, and that no one can escape it. Could anyone watching his final moments still believe that human power is greater than the divine authority? The king who had once ruled with might and authority was brought low by the very God he had defied. Could Herod's death serve as a lasting reminder that all glory belongs to God? The worms that consumed his body were a symbol of the corruption that had taken hold of his soul, and his story would serve as a warning to all who sought to elevate themselves above their rightful place. For the people of Judea, Herod's death was a turning point. Could they now understand the true power of the God of Israel? The king they had once worshipped as a god was now gone, and the lesson of his death was clear for all to see. Could Herod's fate serve as a reminder that no man, no matter how powerful, could claim divine status without facing the consequences? The people of Judea were left to reflect on the events they had witnessed, and the lesson of Herod's pride would echo through history. Herod's legacy is one of pride, arrogance, and divine retribution. Could his story serve as a warning to all who sought to claim power for themselves? The king who had once been praised as a god was now nothing more than a decaying body, consumed by the consequences of his own pride. Could Herod's death serve as a lasting reminder that all power and glory belong to God alone? His story is a powerful testament to the dangers of elevating oneself above one's rightful place, and his fate will be remembered for generations. The death of Herod is a stark reminder that pride comes before a fall. Could anyone who seeks power and authority fail to heed the warning that Herod's fate represents? His life had been marked by political success and power, but his pride had led to his downfall. Could Herod's story serve as a reminder to all who sought to exalt themselves that humility before God is the only path to true greatness? The king who had once been hailed as a god was now gone, but his story would live on as a powerful warning. Herod's story is a cautionary tale for all who seek power. Could anyone who hears it fail to understand the dangers of pride and arrogance? The worms that consumed his body were a reminder that no man, no matter how great, could stand in the place of God. Could future generations learn from Herod's mistake and avoid the same fate? His story is a powerful testament to the justice of God, and his death serves as a warning to all who would seek to claim the glory that belongs to God alone. In the end, Herod's death was more than just the end of a king's life. It was a powerful display of God's sovereignty and justice. Could anyone who hears this story still doubt the power of the God of Israel? The king who had once been praised as a god was now gone, but his story would serve as a lasting reminder that no man could claim the glory of God and survive. Could Herod's life and death be a lesson for all who seek power, reminding them that true authority belongs to God alone? The story of Herod's downfall is a powerful reminder of the dangers of pride and the importance of giving glory to God. What about you? Have you ever found yourself elevating your own success or achievements above your humility before God? Could Herod's story inspire you to reflect on the areas of your life where pride might be taking root? His fate serves as a warning to all who seek to claim power or glory that belongs only to God. If this story resonated with you, don't stop here. Subscribe to our channel for more biblical stories and lessons that challenge and inspire your faith. Share your thoughts. Have you ever felt the pull of pride like Herod? Let us know in the comments below, and let's discuss how we can apply these lessons to our own lives. How will you choose humility over pride in your life today? Comment below.